Welcome to The Explainer. We're going to jump right into a huge question today, one that's been debated for, well, centuries. Are criminals born or are they made?
I mean, think about it. Is someone's fate basically sealed from birth, written in their DNA? Or is it all about their environment, the world they grow up in? Yep, it's that classic nature versus nurture debate. And today, we're going to dig into all of it, from the pretty bizarre theories to the truly groundbreaking science.
Okay, so to get into this, we've got to go back in time. Let's start in the 19th century with this theory that was, and I'm not kidding, all about the bumps on your head. This was basically the first big swing science took at trying to identify a born criminal. The whole thing was called phrenology.
So this guy, a physician named Franz Joseph Gall, comes up with an idea that sounds kind of simple on the surface. He thought the brain wasn't one big thing, but a bunch of different organs, And each organ controlled a different part of your personality. The theory went that if one of those brain organs was bigger, it would push out on the skull and create a bump. So all you had to do was feel someone's head to, supposedly read their entire personality. Wild, right?
And this is what they used. This symbolical head was basically their map to your soul. I mean, look at it. They had a spot for everything. Benevolence was up here on the forehead. Combativeness was down by the ear. You can see why people bought into it, right? It was this promise of a simple, visual, and, scientific way to figure someone out just by looking at their head.
But this wasn't just some quirky academic thing. No. Phrenology led to this really dangerous idea of the born criminal. And you can imagine how appealing that was. I mean, what if you could spot a criminal before they ever committed a crime? You could stop them, right? For society, for the people in charge, that was an incredibly powerful and, a very seductive idea.
There was just one tiny problem. It was completely, totally wrong. It didn't work. One source put it perfectly, saying its predictive power could not climb above 0. Basically, it was useless. And so, eventually, the whole thing was tossed out and called what it really was: pseudoscience, quackery.
So phrenology gets debunked. But did the search for a biological root of crime just stop? No way. The idea didn't die, it just evolved. The focus shifted from something you could see on the outside, like bumps on a skull, to something deep inside us: our genes, our chromosomes. Fast forward to the 1960s. Scientists discover the XYY chromosome, and suddenly the media goes wild with stories about so-called supermales who were, hardwired for aggression. Turns out that was mostly just hype. Then, in the 90s, we get the famous MAOA gene, which the press just loved calling the warrior gene. The claim was that it was a straight-up gene for violence. But the reality? So much more complicated. The crucial studies showed that, having this gene variant mattered, but only if you also had a traumatic childhood. If you had the gene but grew up in a good environment, no increased risk. It was a huge piece of the puzzle.
And just like with the head bumping thing, these genetic ideas caused a huge media sensation. You saw headlines everywhere screaming about the discovery of the criminal gene. I love how one source described it. They called it the scientific analog of a Kardashian wedding. And that's perfect, right? It was this big, sensational story that everyone was talking about, and it offered this beautifully simple answer to a really, really complex problem.
Okay, so where does all this leave us? Well, it's pretty clear the answer isn't a simple or. It's not nature or nurture. It's really more like an intricate dance between the two. It's and.
This chart really drives home what we know now. Take a look. In the UK, the murder rate is around 25 per million. Now look at Detroit. It's about 1,000. That is a 40 times difference. Are the people in Detroit genetically 40 times different than people in the UK? Of course not. So what's the big difference? It's the environment. It's things like poverty, access to drugs, gang activity. And this gets to the heart of it all. Your genes might load the gun, but it's almost always the environment that pulls the trigger.
And all of this leads us to how scientists look at it today, which they call the integrated biopsychosocial model. I know, it's a mouthful, but the idea behind it is pretty straightforward. You have to look at the whole person, the whole picture. You've got biological stuff like the MAOA gene, but that stuff only really starts to matter when it crashes into environmental factors, like being abused as a kid or growing up around violence. One side of the equation just doesn't tell you the whole story.
There's this great quote from a geneticist, Professor Steve Jones, and he just puts it so bluntly. He says, "The idea that you can separate out nature and nurture from murder or anything else is completely foolish." So let's go back to that big question we started with. Are criminals born or are they made? Well, the science is pretty darn clear at this point. The answer is yes, it's both.
Okay, so we have this much more complex scientific picture now. But what does that actually mean in the real world? Like, what happens when you try to bring this kind of genetic evidence into a courtroom? Well, that's where things get really interesting and really controversial. Welcome to the world of neurolaw.
Neurolaw is basically this new field where lawyers and judges are trying to use brain science and genetics in legal cases. But here's the thing. In court, this kind of evidence is a total double-edged sword. A defense lawyer won't usually say, "My client's genes made him innocent." Instead, they'll argue for a lighter sentence. Your Honor, his biology made him less responsible. He couldn't control himself. But then, and this is the crazy part, the prosecution can take that exact same evidence and flip it. They can say, "See, he's biologically wired to be violent. He's a future danger to society, and we should lock him up for good."
So when you really step back and look at the big picture, you can see this direct line, right, from the 19th century all the way to today. That old ambition to identify a criminal by their biology, it never really went away. It's still here. We just traded in the weird calipers they used to measure skulls for high-tech gene sequencers and fMRI brain scans.
And that leaves us with a really, really important question to think about. Phrenology was, bad science, but it showed us just how dangerous these ideas can be, how easy it is to label people and stigmatize them. The science we have today is, well, it's infinitely more powerful. So the real question is, how do we make sure we use this incredible knowledge responsibly? How do we avoid making the same old mistakes all over again? That right there is the huge challenge we're facing on this new frontier.